So Derek, for at least 200 years since the Luddites started smashing textile machinery in England, people have been warning episodically that technology was about to create mass unemployment, structural unemployment. So why do you think this time around things might be different?
So what I call in the piece is the boys who cried robot, and they're just constantly wrong. But at the end of the boy who cried wolf, the wolf comes at the end, and I think that's actually what's going to happen with technology as well. What we can see is that underneath the good news of the labor market recovery, and there is a lot of good news, we're at the longest period of private sector job creation in history, but the number of men who are not working, the inactivity rate for men, has doubled since the 1970s. And this is a concerning statistic, something that Tyler Cowen has called the key statistic for understanding that there's something deep inside the US economy that is rotting. The second thing that we look to is just the natural dexterity of artificial intelligence and software. There was this study from Oxford that said that 47% of jobs in the US are replaceable within the next 2 decades.
47%, so we're not just talking about cashiers. What do you see as the vulnerable sectors of the economy?
Well, the most common jobs in America are cashiers, retail salespeople, office clerks, and then a variety of drivers. Just about all of these jobs, we can imagine without much creativity how they might be automated.
So let me ask you about the social consequences of all this. Do you think that we as human beings need work to feel satisfied with our lives?
It's a hard question to answer. Are people happier when they are working full-time or not? On the one hand, we have a lot of evidence that suggests that when people lose their jobs, they're miserable.
Right.
But the smart question is, are they miserable because working is inherently good, or are they miserable because they're not earning money and they're failing to meet a cultural expectation that they work? On the other hand, you could always point to any number of people who are taking care of the elderly for no money, who are donating time to community service, the millions of parents who are home raising their children, which I think is work. It's just not work that is compensated. They're actually much happier, according to some studies, than people who are working full-time. And one way that I square this in the piece is that I say contentment is always spoken in the present tense, but something more than contentment, pride, a sense of purpose, tends to be reflective. We get pride from the things that we have done. And so I come down in this piece on the side of saying many jobs might be terrible. Many jobs are terrible. But there's something about work that is important enough to be worth saving.
This is a really important point, though. I mean, how old is the idea of full-time work?
It's sort of a fairly recent invention. It's arguably an invention of the Industrial Revolution. But I do think that when we imagine the transition from this period of full-time employment to whatever's coming next, that we do have to grapple with the fact that even though our caveman brain can be made happy by hunter-gathering, we're not going to go from full-time employment to hunter-gatherers over a period of months. That's completely impossible. What's going to happen is we're going to go through a transitionary period that's going to be messy, because people are going to live with both the expectation to work full-time and the lack of full-time opportunities.
So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities here, a dystopian future in which we're all sitting on the couch and feeling depressed and playing World of Warcraft all day, to, at the other end, a happy, thriving community of creative types who are really exploring their interests and deriving tremendous satisfaction from creating things for each other. How do we prepare for these futures? Is there some role for the government to play in avoiding the dystopian outcome and supporting the more positive possibilities?
Yeah. I suggest a kind of national marketplace of work. There is a website called Mechanical Turk that Amazon supports, where people who are looking for certain tasks can essentially post that tasks. So-called Turks can take up the task and then fulfill it. What I suggest in this piece is what if a marketplace like that could be supported by local governments? So I think that it's important to build policies that find a way to allow people to work through this future as well.
Do you think in general we just have the wrong idea about work? There are a lot of people doing jobs that they hate, including being, in some cases, cashiers for 8 hours a day, standing on their feet. I mean, do you think we are possibly on the cusp of a period of great liberation?
I hope so. It's difficult, I think, to understand that getting to that positive future requires government intervention that seems outside the scope of this government. But what I hope this piece does is get people to sort of tease apart what we think of when we think about work. If technology replaces great swaths of work that is terrible, it might open up the possibility that we have room to find jobs that align with purpose, with fulfillment. It's not easy. It's going to take an enormous cultural transformation, not only among us who have essentially anointed work as the religion of America, but also in Washington, where we're essentially going to have to support much more liberal policies than we have already. But there is, I think, a path towards optimism.